The moment Isadora Kingsley stepped into the vampire court and announced that Silas Morroy belonged to her, every ancient creature in that chamber went utterly, dangerously still. She had walked through the grand obsidian doors without an invitation, without a guard escort, without even the ceremonial blood offering that every visitor to the Court of Ashenveil was required to present. She had walked in wearing a blazer that still had chalk dust on the sleeve, carrying nothing but the furious certainty in her dark eyes and a piece of parchment that shook slightly in her grip because her hands were trembling, though her voice was not. "I am invoking the ancient vow of claiming," she said, loudly and clearly into the silence. "Under the blood law of the old compact between human and vampire courts, I claim Silas Morroy as my chosen, by the right of the marked bond, by the proof of mutual exchange, and I am daring any single one of you to tell me that law no longer holds." The court erupted, not in applause, not in welcome. In outrage, 300 vampires in formal court dress, white-skinned and silver-haired and ancient as old stone, turned toward this human woman who had the audacity to stand in the center of their sacred hall and speak words that had not been spoken in 4 centuries. They hissed. They rose from their tiered seats. One council elder pointed a long finger at her and called her nothing but a mortal fool who would bleed for the insult. Another laughed, the sound like crystal breaking, and said that the human teacher had finally lost whatever small mind she possessed. They had always doubted her. From the very first day she had appeared in their world, they had looked at Isadora Kingsley and seen only a problem to be managed. A human hired under unusual diplomatic circumstances to teach the young half-bloods of the court, the children of vampire and human unions who existed uncomfortably between 2 worlds, and needed someone who understood both. She was too warm, they said, too soft, too mortal. She smelled of chalk and coffee and sunlight, and every ancient creature in that hall had treated her presence the way they might treat a small, harmless bird that had wandered into a room full of cats. She had let them underestimate her. She had spent 8 months letting them underestimate her, because Silas had asked her to, and because she trusted him with a depth that had surprised even her. Now, in the center of the pandemonium she had deliberately caused, the great doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and Silas Morroy walked in. He was everything the court feared him to be, and everything they could not control, and he moved like a blade, moving through water, unhurried and inevitable. 6 feet and 4 inches of ancient power, white-skinned as winter marble, with hair the color of frost, falling loose to his collar, and eyes that were the deep amber of a flame burning at its most concentrated point. He wore black, always black, cut in the severe military style of the old empire, with silver sigils at the cuffs that denoted rank so high that even the council elders were technically his subordinates. He was the Lord of Ashenveil, the oldest living vampire on this continent, the one they called the Unbroken, because in 600 years nothing and no one had ever brought him to his knees. He looked across the erupting court, and his amber eyes found Isadora in under a second. The smallest thing happened in his expression. Something that opened and then controlled itself, like a door pushed slightly ajar before a careful hand pressed it mostly closed again. Only Isadora, who had spent 8 months learning to read every precise micro-movement of that controlled face, would have recognized it for what it was, relief. Fierce, consuming, barely leashed relief. She had made it. She was still standing. She was here. "My lord," one of the council elders snapped, turning to Silas with the full force of his outrage. "This human creature has invoked the ancient vow of claiming in open court. She must be removed. She must be punished. The blood law she is citing has not been valid for 400 years, and even if it were, no mortal has the right to claim." "She has every right," Silas said. His voice was not loud. It never needed to be. It fell into the noise of the court the way a stone falls into shallow water, and the noise stopped. "The ancient vow of claiming was never repealed," he continued, stepping forward through the silent hall until he stood 10 feet from Isadora, facing the council but with the whole line of his body angled toward her like a compass needle pointing north. It was deliberately obscured from the public records by the Luther faction in the year 1640, as part of their efforts to prevent any future human from invoking rites that would complicate their political maneuvering. "I have the original texts. She has a copy." He nodded toward the parchment in Isadora's hand. "And I have been waiting for someone with both the knowledge and the courage to stand in this hall and cite it correctly." He finally turned to look at her fully. "You are 4 minutes late," he said, and his tone contained something that in any other man, in any other context, might have been called tenderness. "I missed the first bus," she said. "The 7:15 does not wait for anyone." One of the council elders made a sound of absolute disbelief. Silas looked back at the court, and any trace of softness in his expression was gone, replaced by something that could have cut glass. "The claim stands. The bond is recognized. Any challenge to this woman is a challenge to me, and I will answer it personally. Now, is there anyone in this hall who wishes to make that challenge?" No one did. That was 3 weeks ago. This is how they got there. Isadora had been a high school history teacher for 6 years before the letter came. She taught at a public school in the north of the city, a school that served a mixed neighborhood of humans and half-bloods, and she was widely regarded by her colleagues as the best teacher in the building. Her students, including the half-blood ones who were often quiet and cautious, and watched the doors too carefully, trusted her. She was firm and warm and funny, and deeply, stubbornly fair, and she had a habit of arriving early to make sure nobody sat alone at lunch, whether they were 17 years old or appeared to be 17 years old while actually being 60. The letter came from an official-looking address that she later learned was a vampire court liaison office, written on paper that felt slightly heavier than normal and smelled faintly of something old and clean, like a library in a very cold building. It explained in extremely careful and formal language that the Court of Ashenveil operated an educational program for young half-blood wards of the court, children between the ages of 8 and 16 who were under the court's protection, and that the court was seeking a qualified human educator with specific experience in half-blood education and cross-cultural curriculum development. The salary was extraordinary. The location was undisclosed until acceptance. The contract contained 17 pages of confidentiality clauses. Her colleagues told her not to go. Her sister told her she had lost her mind. Her department head said, in a very quiet voice, that once you stepped into vampire court politics, you did not simply step back out, and that she should think very carefully about the implications of being the only human in a closed court environment with no independent oversight. Isadora read every one of those 17 pages. She asked 3 specific legal questions by reply letter and received 3 extremely precise answers that satisfied her. She negotiated the salary up by 12% and added a clause requiring that she be given independent egress rights from the court building at all times. Then she accepted. She met Silas Moroi on her first day. She had expected the Lord of Ashenveil to be exactly what his reputation described. Imperious, cold. Someone who would acknowledge her presence in the manner of a very large and ancient cat acknowledging a piece of furniture. She had prepared for condescension. She had prepared for danger. She had prepared for the specific variety of arrogance that comes from 6 centuries of being the most powerful creature in any room. She had not prepared for the moment when he walked into the classroom where she was setting up her materials, looked at the lesson plan she had left on the desk, picked it up, read it in approximately 4 seconds, and said, without preamble, "You have placed the Treaty of Varenthis in the wrong century. It was not 1432, it was 1429. The human historical record has an error that we have never corrected because it served certain political interests at the time." She looked up from the bookshelf she was organizing. "Do you have documentation for that?" He blinked. It was the smallest possible blink, but she caught it because even then, even on day 1, she was already watching him with more attention than was perhaps strictly necessary. "I was present at the signing," he said. "That is not documentation," she said. "That is testimony, which is valuable, but which I will require to corroborate with at least 2 additional sources before I alter an established curriculum. If you would be willing to provide a written account of your direct observation, I will cross-reference it with the primary sources I already have." There was a silence. "You are requiring primary sources from me," he said. "I am requiring primary sources from anyone who wants to change what I teach," she said pleasantly. "If you were there, I have no doubt your account will be compelling. It will also be extraordinarily useful. I would genuinely love to have it." He stared at her for a long moment. The amber eyes were entirely unreadable. "I will have it on your desk by Thursday," he said. He was on her desk by Wednesday morning, along with 3 additional documents she had not asked for, which corrected 4 other historical errors in the standard curriculum and were written in a hand so precise and controlled it looked nearly typeset. She read every word. She incorporated every correction. She wrote a formal note of thanks that was professional and specific, and referenced exactly which details she found most useful, because she had been raised by a librarian mother who believed that gratitude should be precise or not given at all. He came back on Thursday to see if she had received his documents. She told him she had already revised the curriculum and showed him the new lesson framework. He stood very still at the corner of her desk and looked at what she had done, and she watched him look at it. And there was something happening behind his eyes that she did not yet have enough information to interpret. He came back again the following week, this time with a question about the way she had explained the concept of vampire political succession to the younger students. The week after that, he came with a correction that turned out, when she checked her sources, to not actually be a correction at all, and she told him so directly, citing 3 independent texts. And he spent 6 minutes arguing with her before conceding with a precise inclination of his head that she had privately decided to catalogue as Silas Moroi acknowledging he was wrong. A category she suspected was historically very small. She stopped noticing when his visits started happening every day. He was careful, always. He did not touch her. He did not allow the conversations to drift toward the personal. When he spoke about history, he spoke with the flat precision of someone reporting facts. And if there were moments when that precision softened into something that sounded more like recollection, more like grief, she gave it the same careful attention she gave everything about him and said nothing that would make him close off. But she was watching. She was always watching. She noticed that the court treated him with the deference afforded to the most powerful being in the room, but also with a very specific kind of wariness that she gradually came to understand was not about his power, it was about his principles. Silas Moroi was by vampire standards dangerously honorable. He followed the old codes with an inflexibility that made him both revered and politically inconvenient. When he gave his word, it meant something. When he set a limit, it held. The other court nobles, who operated in a constant swirl of hidden motives and shifting alliances, found him difficult to leverage because there was no hidden motive in him to find. She found this extraordinary and slightly heartbreaking, because she could see exactly how much it had cost him over the centuries to maintain that kind of absolute integrity in a court built on beautifully ancient, practiced deception. The first time they were truly alone, without the court's observation, was in the library. It was late. She had stayed working past the point when the half-blood children went to their dormitories, and the day staff humans had left for their bus routes, and she had not noticed how late it was until the library went very quiet around her, and she looked up from the texts she was cross-referencing to find Silas standing in the doorway, not moving, just watching her with those amber eyes in a way that made the back of her neck feel warm. "You should not be here alone," he said. "I am in the library," she said. "I am surrounded by books. This is my natural habitat." "This is a vampire court," he said. "After the evening bell, the human staff are expected to be in secured quarters." "I am aware of that expectation," she said. "I have also observed that the court ignores that expectation in practice, because having the human teacher working late is convenient for several of the council members who want curriculum adjustments made quickly, and would rather I work extra hours than explain to the Lord of the Court why they are bypassing protocol for their own convenience." He was silent for a moment. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything," she said, which was true, and which she could see from the way he stilled even further, was something he had perhaps begun to suspect, but not yet confirmed. She returned to her texts. "Also, I am not afraid of vampires after dark. I am afraid of systemic dishonesty and badly sourced historical claims. The former I have tools for managing, the latter keeps me awake at night." He came into the library and sat across from her at the long reading table. He did not speak for a while. He picked up one of the books from the stack beside her and turned it in his hands, and she did not ask why, just let him sit there. and the library felt different with him in it, warmer, somehow, despite the fact that his skin was precisely the temperature of the air. "I have been lord of this court for 112 years, he said eventually, not looking up from the book. "Before that I was its most senior general for 80 years. Before that I was a soldier. Before that a scholar. Before that a physician's apprentice, in a town that no longer exists, in a century that most of your history texts do not accurately describe." He set the book down and looked at her. "In all of that time, I have not encountered anyone who looked at the truth of this court and refused to be managed by it." "I was not hired to be managed," she said. "I was hired to teach." "Yes," he said. "That is becoming increasingly apparent." She looked at him for a long moment, reading the careful architecture of his expression, the way his control sat over whatever was underneath it, like beautiful, load-bearing stonework. She thought about what she was doing. She thought about the very specific quality of the feeling that settled in her chest each time he appeared in the doorway of her classroom, a feeling that was warm and sharp and entirely inadvisable. She said, "Why do you keep coming here?" He did not answer immediately. That was the thing at Silas, she had learned. He did not answer immediately because he did not give answers he had not fully considered, and even now, even knowing that about him, the weight made her pulse do something inconvenient. "Because," he said finally, "in 112 years of running this court, I have not once looked forward to a conversation." She thought that was probably the most devastating thing anyone had ever said to her in the context of a compliment. And she was fairly certain from the way his eyes held hers that he knew exactly how it landed. She looked back at her texts. "Good night, Silas." He rose. He walked to the door. He paused in the frame. "Good night, Isadora." She did not watch him leave, but she was smiling at her book, and she suspected, with the intuition that had always been one of her more inconvenient gifts, that somewhere in the corridor outside, the Lord of Ashenveil might be doing something similar. The threat came in November, 2 months after she arrived. Its name was Aldrich Voss, and he was the kind of ancient vampire that gave even other vampires a specific kind of wariness. He was older than Silas by 2 centuries at least, though his age did not give him power so much as cunning. He had survived 600 years of vampire court politics by being precisely as dangerous as everyone expected him to be, which meant they were always watching for the obvious threat and never quite saw the oblique one coming. He arrived at the Court of Ashenveil with a delegation from the Western courts claiming a diplomatic visit, but Isadora watched the way Silas's expression went still and flat when the announcement was made, the way that the senior court staff moved differently in Aldrich's presence, and she knew within 2 hours of his arrival that something was very wrong. She asked Silas about it in the library that night. He did not want to answer. She could see him measuring what to tell her, and she waited, and finally he said, "Aldrich Voss believes that my court's diplomatic relationship with the human liaison offices is a sign of weakness. He is here to evaluate whether Ashenveil can be destabilized." "Can it be?" she asked. "Ordinarily, no," he said, "but he is aware of a legal mechanism, an old blood law called the challenge of succession. Under its terms, if a ruling lord of a vampire court can be demonstrated to have formed a bond of significant personal attachment to a human, that lord can be removed from power on the grounds that their judgment has been compromised." She looked at him steadily. "And has the Lord of Ashenveil formed a bond of significant personal attachment to a human?" The silence stretched. "The Lord of Ashenveil," Silas said carefully, "has formed an attachment that he has not acted upon, has not formally acknowledged, and has taken extensive precautions to ensure cannot be proven by the standards the blood law requires. But Aldrich knows. Aldrich suspects. There is a difference, for now." She let that sit for a moment. What happens if he finds proof? "If Aldrich can demonstrate the bond to the satisfaction of the old court," Silas said, "he can invoke the challenge of succession. I would be stripped of my lordship. The court would fall under the jurisdiction of the Western courts for a transitional period. During that period, human staff would be dismissed." He paused. At best, she understood what he was not saying. And at worst, he said, "you would be considered evidence, and evidence in vampire court proceedings is handled in ways that do not prioritize the welfare of the human in question." She held his gaze. "So you have been protecting me by keeping your distance." I have been attempting to, he said. I am aware the attempt is imperfect. Because you keep coming to the library, yes. Because you have told me things you have apparently not told anyone in 112 years, yes. Because, she said very quietly, this has already gone rather past a professional relationship, regardless of what either of us has been willing to formally acknowledge. He looked at her with those amber eyes, and for once the control was not entirely there, and what was underneath it made her breath do something irregular. Yes, he said, that is accurate. She thought about this. She thought about the danger, the blood law, the hidden motive behind Aldrich's visit, the very real possibility that being the evidence in a vampire court proceeding would not go well for her. She thought about Silas standing in the doorway of her library night after night, choosing a conversation that put his entire court at risk because some part of him could not stop, and she thought about how a creature who had survived 600 years by being absolutely controlled had apparently met her and developed a very specific problem with that control, and she thought that the most extraordinary thing about it was not that she made him feel that way, but that he had looked at that feeling and chosen to be honest about it rather than to manage it away. All right, she said. Tell me exactly how the challenge of succession works. Tell me every detail of the blood law, and tell me if there is any counter-mechanism within the old codes that would protect the court and protect you. Because if there is, I would like to find it. He looked at her for a long moment. Why? Because, she said, in the tone she used when a student asked her why any of this historical material actually mattered, warm and direct and absolutely certain. You have spent 600 years holding everything together set by yourself, and you do not have to do that right now. Something happened in his face that she thought might be the closest she had ever seen to him being undone. And then he sat down across from her, and they started to work. They worked for 3 nights. She read every text he brought her. She asked questions with the precision of a surgeon and the patience of someone who genuinely loved the architecture of systems, because teaching had made her very good at understanding how rules worked, and more importantly, how they could be used for purposes their original authors had not intended. On the 3rd night, she found the ancient vow of claiming. It was buried in a supplementary codex to the original blood laws. The one that Silas had mentioned had been deliberately obscured by the Luther faction in the 17th century. The vow predated the challenge of succession by 200 years, which meant that under the hierarchy of the blood law system, it took precedence, and what it stated, in the beautiful and archaic language of a period when vampire courts and human courts had been more formally intertwined, was that a bond between a vampire lord and a human was not a vulnerability. If that bond was formally acknowledged and claimed, it was instead a protected right, recognized by both courts, and any challenge made on the basis of that bond was thereby nullified. She looked up from the codex at 2 in the morning, with chalk dust on her blazer, from a lesson she had corrected earlier, and said, "Silas, I think I found it." He read what she was pointing at. He read it twice. He sat back in his chair, and she watched his face go through something that was not quite shock, but was adjacent to it. The expression of someone who has been carrying a weight so long they have stopped imagining it could be put down. "This was always there," he said. "Yes. I did not know it was there." The Luther faction were very thorough, she said. But they were not thorough enough because this codex was filed under supplementary liturgical materials rather than political codes, and whoever was supposed to remove it apparently thought liturgical materials were not worth the effort. She paused. Which tells us something rather useful about how people in power tend to underestimate things they consider decorative. He looked at her. "The vow requires mutual acknowledgement," he said. "Both parties must make a formal declaration in open court. I know. It requires the human to stand in the court and invoke the claiming, openly, in front of everyone. I know, Isadora." His voice had changed. It was lower, more careful. "Aldrich Voss is in this court. If he realizes what you are doing before the declaration is complete, he will not allow it to finish. Then we need to make sure it finishes before he realizes what is happening," she said. "Which means timing. And it means I need to walk into that court and do this before he has any warning." She folded her hands on the table. "I can do that, but I need you to trust me with the exact legal language. I need to get the invocation precisely right. and I need you to be there. If you say the words incorrectly, he said, the invocation is void and cannot be attempted again for 10 years. That is the blood law. Then make sure I have the correct words, Isadora. He said her name with an intensity that made the rest of the sentence unnecessary, that made clear in the space between two syllables exactly what the stakes were if anything went wrong, exactly how much he did not want her in danger, exactly how precisely the idea of losing her to a vampire court proceeding was the one thing that his 6 centuries of control had absolutely failed to make him tolerable with. I know, she said softly. I know what this is. I know what I am choosing. She held his eyes. I am choosing it, that is the point. He looked at her for a long time. Then he reached across the table and for the first time took her hand in both of his. And his skin was cool, and his grip was extremely careful. The grip from someone who understood precisely how much more strength he had than was appropriate for this moment, and was controlling it with everything he had, and she felt it in her throat, and her chest and her fingertips all at once. I have been lord of this court for 112 years, he said. In all of that time, I have not once been afraid of losing something. She turned her hand over under his and held her back. You are not going to lose me. No, he said with the absolute certainty of someone making a vow. I am not. Aldrich Voss moved on a Tuesday. He had spent 3 weeks gathering what he believed to be sufficient evidence, the records of Silas's library visits, the testimony of 2 court staff members who had observed him in the classroom doorway, the fact that Silas had personally reviewed and approved every change to the curriculum Isadora had made, and had done so with an attention to detail that no vampire lord devoted to purely administrative matters. He presented his case to the court council in a closed session on a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock, citing the challenge of succession and demanding a formal review of Silas's fitness to rule. Isadora was on the 7:15 bus by 7:30. She missed it because the schedule had changed, and she ran for the 7:40, which arrived 4 minutes late, which was why she walked through the obsidian doors of the Court of Ashenveil at precisely the wrong moment. As the council session was already in progress, and every ancient creature in that hall turned to look at the human woman in the blazer, with chalk dust on the sleeve, who had just opened the doors she was not supposed to open. She had the parchment in her hand. Her heart was going at approximately twice its normal rate, and she had every word of the ancient vow of claiming memorized with precision of someone who had recited it to herself on every bus stop and street corner between her apartment and the court, because Isadora Kingsley had been a teacher for 6 years, and she knew how to prepare for the most important presentation of her life. She breathed. She stepped into the center of the hall. She spoke, and then Silas walked in, and then nobody challenged it. Aldrich Voss was not a creature who gave up cleanly. That was the thing about ancient cunning. It did not stop, it redirected. He withdrew his challenge of succession with the precise grace of someone who knew when a legal mechanism had been outmaneuvered, but his eyes, as he looked at Isadora in the center of that court, held a promise that had nothing to do with blood laws and everything to do with the kind of patience that 600 years of political survival cultivates. She saw it, she catalogued it, she said nothing. Silas saw it too. That night, after the court had reluctantly dispersed, and the council had officially recorded the claiming in the ancient registers, and Aldrich's delegation had retired to their guest wing with the extremely careful politeness of very dangerous people who had not yet decided what to do next, Silas found her in the library. She was sitting at the long reading table. She was not reading anything. She was looking at her hands on the tabletop, and she was allowing herself the private reality of how frightened she had been, which she had not been able to allow herself while she was in the court because the court would have used it. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. You are shaking, he said. Delayed response, she said. I was perfectly fine while it was happening. I know, I watched you. He paused. I have watched an enormous number of people face this court over the centuries. Lords, generals, soldiers with 2 centuries of battlefield experience. I have never watched anyone walk into that chamber the way you did. Terrified and 4 minutes late. Certain, he said, as if the outcome was not in question. She looked up at him. I was not certain. I was decided. Those are different things. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said quietly. They are. She set her hands flat on the table. Aldrich is not finished. No, he is going to look for another mechanism. Something outside the blood laws. Something that does not require a legal framework. She said this plainly, because she was not the kind of person who was served by pretending the danger was smaller than it was. He is going to try to remove me in a way that does not leave a record. Silas did not deny it. Yes, that is what he will do. Then we need to not be complacent. She met his eyes. I am not asking you to wrap me in armor and keep me away from windows. I am asking you to tell me the truth about the threat so I can work within it. That is all I have ever asked of this court. I know, he said. Isadora. He said her name the way he had in the library 3 nights ago, with that particular weight, and she felt it the same way she had felt it then. You have just claimed the most politically volatile vampire lord on this continent in open court in front of 300 witnesses. The danger you are in is not abstract. I am aware. You are a human woman. I have always been a human woman, she said. That has not changed. What has changed is what is between us, and that has not made me less capable. It has made me less alone. She held his gaze, which matters enormously to me. He stood up from the chair. He came around the table, and she turned to face him, and he was standing close enough that she could see the exact precise detail of his amber eyes, the way they held light like amber actually does, like something ancient suspended inside clarity, and she thought about 600 years of choosing honesty over convenience, and how that had somehow led to this moment in this library, and she was aware that she was going to be in danger for some time, and that she was also, irrevocably, and with great specificity, in love with this man. He reached out and touched her face with one careful hand, his thumb against her jaw, and the deliberateness of it made her breath stop, because she understood that for him, this small touch was the same magnitude of choice as what she had done in the court today, a deliberate, acknowledged, irrevocable thing. I have wanted to do that, he said, since approximately the 4th week of your employment. The week you brought the documents to correct the Treaty of Varenthis. The week you thanked me for them in writing, with the specific citation of which details you found most useful, he said. It was the most precise act of gratitude I have ever received from anyone. I did not know what to do with it. She laughed, and the laugh was warm and slightly wobbly because of the residual adrenaline, and because the tenderness in his voice was doing something to her composure, and she put her hand over his where it rested against her jaw. What did you do with it? I read it approximately 14 times, he said, and then I came back with another correction, which turned out to be incorrect, because I was not as focused as I normally am. You were nervous, she said. I was not nervous, he said, with great dignity. I was experiencing an unfamiliar processing delay. She laughed again, and this time he almost smiled, that near-invisible shifting of his expression that she had learned to recognize as the real version of amusement. Not the court-appropriate version, but the actual one, and she thought that she might be one of very few people in 600 years who had ever seen it. Silas, she said. Yes, I would very much like you to kiss me. He looked at her for a moment, and then he did, with the same absolute deliberateness he brought to everything. And it was the kind of kiss that knows exactly what it is, that does not rush or perform, that is simply and completely certain. And she thought that this was exactly what it felt like to be chosen by someone who had been choosing very carefully for a very long time. Aldrich Voss made his move 11 days later. He came at her not through the court, not through any legal mechanism, but through the children. One of the half-blood students, a 13-year-old girl named Mira, who had been with Isadora since the beginning, did not appear for her morning lesson. When Isadora went looking, she found a note in her own classroom, on paper that smelled of Western court and cold strategy. The note said that Mira was safe, and would remain so if Isadora Kingsley chose to remove herself from the Court of Ashenveil permanently and renounce the claiming by sundown. Isadora sat with the note in her hands for approximately 30 seconds. Then she went to find Silas. She found him in the council chamber, and she handed him the note, and she watched him read it. She watched his expression do something she had not seen it do before, something that burned very cold. The expression of a creature who had survived 600 years, partly because when something truly important to him was threatened, he became not more volatile but more still, more focused, more absolutely and terrifyingly precise. "Stay here," he said. "I am not going to stay here," she said. He looked at her. "Isadora, I know where Aldrich's delegation is housed," she said. "I have been watching their movements since the day they arrived because I am a teacher, and I noticed patterns, and their patterns changed 4 days ago, in a way that told me they were planning something. I know they have been using the East Service corridors because the court security is lighter there. I know they have at least 2 exits that bypass the main guard posts." She held his gaze. "I cannot fight them. You can, but I can navigate them, and you need both of those things right now." He was silent for 2 full seconds. Then he said, "Stay behind me." "Obviously," she said. They moved through the court together, and Isadora was aware at every point of the precise and controlled danger of Silas beside her. The way the court staff stepped back without being asked, the way even the shadows in the corridors seemed to behave differently around him. She'd had known he was the most powerful vampire in this building from the beginning, but she had understood it abstractly, the way you understand that the ocean is very deep when you are looking at it from the shore. Moving through these halls with him when he was like this, she understood it in the concrete, specific way you understand the ocean when you are swimming in it. He did not draw on that power carelessly. That was what she noticed. Even now, even in this, he was controlled. They found Mira in a room in the East Wing, unharmed and furious and 13 years old, with the particular cold dignity of a half-blood child who had grown up in a vampire court and was not going to give Aldrich Voss the satisfaction of tears. Aldrich himself was there with 2 of his delegates, and when Silas walked through the door, something happened in the room's atmosphere that Isadora would have described, if pressed, as barometric. "Release the child," Silas said. It was not loud. It was also not a request. Aldrich looked at him with 600 years of political calculation behind his eyes. "The bond is an aberration," he said. "You know what the old lords would have said. You know what the founding covenant requires. A vampire lord does not. The founding covenant also requires that the lord of a court keep safe every ward under its protection," Silas said. "You have violated that requirement. You are on my grounds. You have used a child to threaten a member of my court." He stepped forward. "I am not going to discuss blood law with you, Aldrich. I am going to tell you once more to release the child." Aldrich's delegate moved. Silas moved faster, in a way that Isadora's eyes could not entirely follow, and then the delegate was no longer in the relevant position, and Silas was standing between Aldrich and the door, and Mira was walking quickly toward Isadora, who put both hands on the girl's shoulders and held her. "You are all right," Isadora said quietly. "I have you." "I know," Mira said, in a voice that was slightly unsteady, but trying very hard not to be. "I was not scared." "You do not have to pretend for me," Isadora said. "I know," Mira said again, and then leaned into her, and Isadora held on. Aldrich Voss was escorted from the Court of Ashenveil that night under formal censure. The first formal censure issued by Ashenveil to a Western court lord in 40 years. Silas delivered it personally in writing, with 3 signatories from the court council, citing the violation of ward protection and the extra-legal threat against a formally acknowledged claimed human. He also sent a copy to the overarching Vampire Governance Authority, an ancient body called the Conclave that had the power to review court conduct, and included in that copy the original documentation of Aldrich's deliberate obscuring of the claiming vow in the historical record, which constituted a separate violation of blood law. Aldrich departed before midnight. He did not look at Isadora on his way out. She watched him go from the upper corridor, and she thought about the kind of patience that 600 years of survival cultivated, and she thought that this was probably not the last time she would think about Aldrich Voss. But it was, for now, over, and Mira was in her dormitory, surrounded by the other half-blood children, who had apparently organized a very determined display of solidarity that involved making a large quantity of hot chocolate, and the court was quieter than it had been in weeks. Silas found her on the upper corridor. "You should be in your quarters," he said. "I am watching to make sure he actually leaves," she said. He came to stand beside her at the window. Below, in the courtyard, Aldrich's carriages were moving through the gate. "He is leaving. I can see that." She turned from the window. "Is Mira all right?" "Truly, she is angry," he said, "which is appropriate. She is also, as I understand it, currently coordinating the distribution of hot chocolate to 12 other children, which suggests her resilience is intact. She learned that from the children I had in my public school class, Isadora said. When something goes wrong, you make something warm and you give it to people. It is not a solution to anything, but it is not nothing either. He looked at her. Where did you learn it? My mother, she said. She was a librarian. She believed in specific gratitude and warm beverages. Both have served me well. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I owe you an acknowledgement. She waited. I have spent 112 years running this court on the principle that I do not need assistance, he said. That principle has served the court well. It has not, I am increasingly aware, served me particularly well. Silas, you walked into my court and corrected my history curriculum, he said, with a precision that told her he had been composing this and was committed to finishing it. You found a legal mechanism in a 400-year-old obscured codex that I, with 6 centuries of experience with vampire law, had missed. You told me where Aldrich's delegation was moving, days before they acted, because you were paying attention in a way that my court security, with all its resources, was not. And tonight you walked through those corridors with me when I told you to stay behind, because you had information I needed and you knew it. He looked at him steadily. Yes. I am not accustomed to being partnered, he said. I am not sure I know how to do it correctly. You are doing it, she said. Right now, you are talking to me instead of managing me. That is the whole thing. That is everything. He looked at her with those amber eyes, and the control was still there, as it always was, but underneath it, the thing that had always been underneath it was visible, the warmth and the depth, and the ancient longing of someone who had been alone in his principles for a very long time. I would like to do this correctly, he said. For however long you will let me. She closed the distance between them and put her hand against his chest, feeling the particular stillness of a heart that beat very slowly, and she thought about how she had walked into this court 8 months ago with chalk dust on her blazer and 17 pages of legal clauses in her bag, and how she had genuinely not anticipated this, which was unusual for her because she anticipated most things. For however long, she said, is a long time when you are 600 years old. Yes, he said. I am 31, she said. I know. He put his hand over hers on his chest. I have thought about that at length, if you have not. She had thought about it. She had thought about the fact that she was mortal and he was not, and what that meant for any future they were building. And she had thought about it the way she thought about all difficult logistical realities, practically, and without looking away from the harder implications. In the vampire courts, she said, is there a mechanism by which a human can request the blood exchange? The one that extends life? He was very still. Yes, but it is irrevocable, and it is not something I would ever ask of you. I know you would not ask it, she said. I am asking if I can ask it, of myself, in my own time, if I decide that is what I want. The decision would be entirely yours, he said. I would not try to influence it in any direction. That is what I thought, she said. Good. Then I would like to table that conversation for a period of at least a year, because I am not making a decision of that magnitude. At the end of the same week, I invoked an ancient vow of claiming in open court while missing my bus. I am only asking if the option exists. It exists, he said. Good, she said again. He looked at her. You are the most systematically practical person I have ever encountered. I am a teacher, she said. We plan ahead. Something happened in his expression that was fully, unambiguously a smile, the real one, not the near-invisible court version, but the complete version, and it changed his whole face, made it suddenly and entirely human in the best sense. Warm and specific and directed entirely at her, and she thought that she was probably one of the only peoples in 4 centuries who had ever seen it, and certainly the only one who was going to keep seeing it, and that was the kind of thing that made the irreversibility of an ancient vow feel not like a constraint but like a door into a very good room Buddhism. She went up on her toes and kissed him, and he held her with that characteristic, beautiful care. And, outside the window, Aldrich's carriages passed through the gate, and the court gate closed behind them, solid and final. The months that followed were the best of her life. She knew that was a significant statement, given that the months that followed included continued vampire court politics, 2 more challenges to the claiming from lesser nobles, who were quickly and thoroughly shut down by Silas, and the blood law record she now maintained with meticulous care. A formal visit from the conclave, which lasted 2 weeks, and was nearly as intense as the Aldrich situation, though in a more bureaucratic register, and an incident involving one of the half-blood students discovering a passage behind the court library that turned out to lead to a sealed archive of documents that rewrote the known history of the vampire-human compact of 1600 and required Isadora to spend 3 months doing the most intensive archival work of her career. She loved all of it. She loved the children, who had started treating her with the kind of particular ferocity that children reserve for as adults they have decided are genuinely on their side. She loved the library, which turned out to be the most extraordinary private archive she had ever encountered, containing documents that no human historian had ever accessed. She loved the work of building a curriculum that genuinely served both halves of her students' identities, that did not ask them to pretend either their vampire heritage or their human heritage was less real or less worthy. And she loved Silas, with a specificity and a certainty that grew deeper every week, not because it was easy or uncomplicated, but because it was honest. Because he was honest. Because the same absolute integrity that made him politically inconvenient in his own court made him the most trustworthy person she had ever been in a room with, human or vampire. And because being loved by someone who had spent 6 centuries choosing honesty over convenience was a particular and extraordinary thing, he was protective. She accepted that because she understood it, understood that it came from genuine regard rather than a desire to diminish her, and because his protection was never the kind that required her to be smaller. He worried, she saw him worry, in the controlled and precise way he did everything, scanning a room before she entered it, tracking the politics of every new court visitor with a focus that never quite relaxed. She found this, to her own mild surprise, not stifling but moving, because it was so clear that the worry was about her specifically, that she was the thing that had made the Lord of Ashenveil discover he had something to lose. She told him. On a winter evening in the library, when the snow was doing something dramatic outside the high windows, and they were sitting across from each other, the way they always had, with books between them and the comfortable, warm silence of people who have learned each other's rhythms, that she thought the conclave visit had actually done them a favor. He looked up from the report he was reviewing. In what way? It put the claiming on the formal record of the overarching governance body, she said, which means that any future challenge has to go through a much larger and more complex legal process than the challenge of succession that Aldrich tried. The political cost of challenging us is now higher than any single noble's ambition is likely to sustain. He looked at her for a moment. You have been thinking about the long-term security of our political position. I think about the long-term security of everything, she said. I am a planner. You know, I do know this. He set down the report. I have been thinking about it as the documentation you maintained during the conclave visit was, according to 3 of the conclave's own archivists, the most thoroughly organized evidentiary record they had encountered in 40 years of governance reviews. She smiled. Your point, my point, he said, is that I believe the Court of Ashenveil is in need of a chief archivist and documentation officer, a position that would give the holder formal court status independent of their claiming, their own official role within the governance structure, and the legal standing to maintain and present court records at the governance level. She looked at him across the table. You are offering me a job. I am offering you a position of real institutional authority, he said. One that reflects what you have actually been doing for the past several months, and that formalizes it in a way that would make your status in this court unambiguous on multiple independent legal grounds. She thought about this. I would still keep teaching, absolutely. And the archive access would be unrestricted, with appropriate conservation protocols, yes. The salary would need to reflect both roles. It would. She looked at him. And he looked back at her. And there was something in the quality of this moment, in the particular way he had framed it, that she recognized, because she had been paying attention to him for long enough to know the difference between the Lord of Ashenveil making an administrative decision and Silas Moroi doing something that was partly about her safety, and partly about the fact that he wanted her, formally and unmistakably, and in ways that the court could see, to belong here. "All right," she said. "Yes." He nodded. He picked up the report. He was very controlled about it. But she caught the particular quality of the stillness that followed. The stillness of someone very deliberately not letting their expression do the thing it wanted to do, and she thought that after a year of reading Silas Morroy's face like the most important text she had ever studied, she had become very good at understanding that stillness. "Silas," she said, "you are allowed to be pleased." He looked up. "I am the Lord of Ashenveil," he said. "I do not. You are sitting in the library at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night with snow on the windows, and I am going to be the chief archivist of your court," she said. "You are allowed to be pleased." The smile came, the real one. The one that changed his face entirely, that turned 6 centuries of carefully maintained control into something warm and specific and completely, privately hers. "I am very pleased," he said. Spring came to the Court of Ashenveil with the particular intensity of a winter that had been long and complicated, and Isadora spent the first warm weeks of March doing 2 things simultaneously. She was teaching a unit on the historical development of the vampire-human compact to a classroom of half-blood students who were old enough to start understanding the political context of their own existence, and she was organizing the sealed archive that Mira's discovery had opened up, cataloging documents that had not been touched in 300 years. The conclave sent a formal letter, acknowledging the chief archivist appointment. 2 of the Western courts sent diplomatic notes that were technically congratulatory and practically designed to assess how the political landscape had shifted. She wrote precise and warm responses to all of them, copied Silas on the correspondence, and added the responses to the court's official records. On a Saturday in late March, Silas found her in the archive rather than the library. Surrounded by carefully laid out documents and the particular absorbed quiet of someone doing work they genuinely love, he stood in the doorway as he had stood in the doorway of her classroom on the very first day, and she looked up and she thought about how much had happened between that doorway and this one. How much of the distance between them had been crossed not dramatically but incrementally, one honest conversation at a time, one document at a time, one chosen trust at a time. "Come and look at this," she said, and he crossed the archive and looked at what she was showing him, a letter from the year 1612 written in a human hand, from a woman named Elara Voss, a diplomat, who had been the first formally acknowledged human companion to a vampire lord, and who had written to her sister with the most extraordinary matter-of-fact warmth about what her life had become, about the strangeness and the beauty and the specific privilege of knowing someone who saw the world across centuries, about how she had never intended any of it and had found herself more at home in it than in anything she had previously known. Silas read the letter. He was quiet for a moment. She was happy. Isadora said softly, "You can read it in every sentence. She was genuinely happy." "I knew her," Silas said, slightly. "She was remarkable. She was a diplomat," Isadora said. "She was practical and warm, and she wrote excellent correspondence." She looked at him. "She would have made an extraordinary archivist." He looked at her with those amber eyes, and whatever was in them was entirely unguarded. And she thought that this was probably one of the things she loved most about him, that, with her, in these moments, the 6 centuries of control was present but not defensive, that he had learned to let her see through it not because the control had lessened, but because he had decided she was worth that visibility. "Isadora," he said. "Yes, I want you to know," he said, with the particular precision of someone who has thought carefully about what they want to say and is committed to saying it accurately, that this is not something I take for granted. Any of this. The claiming is a legal mechanism, and I understand its political implications, but what it means to me is not political. What it means to me is that you chose to be here, that you kept choosing to be here, that you walked into a court that doubted everything about you, and you did not shrink from it, and you have not shrunk from it once." She held his gaze. "Neither have you," she said. "You could have managed me from the beginning. You could have kept me at court-appropriate distance and used the political utility of having a human teacher on staff and never let any of the rest of it happen. It would have been safer. It would have been much simpler. She put her hand on the archive table between them, and he covered it with his. "You chose this too, yes," he said. "From approximately the 4th week of your employment, when I sent the note about the Treaty of Varenthis documents." "When you sent the note about the Treaty of Varenthis documents," he confirmed. She laughed, and the laugh echoed warmly off the old stone walls of the archive, and he was smiling, the real smile. And the letter from Elara Voss lay between them on the table, 300 years old and still legible. The careful handwriting of a woman who had found herself more at home in an unexpected life than in anything she had previously known. "I have been thinking about the question we tabled," she said. He was still. "Which question?" "The one I said I would table for at least a year." She met his eyes. "It has been almost a year and a half." The stillness deepened. "You do not have to have decided anything." "I know." She turned her hand over under his and held it. "I have decided something." He looked at her. "I am not deciding from fear," she said, because she wanted to be clear about this, because clarity was one of the things she believed in the way other people believed in luck or fate. "I am not deciding because I am frightened of time or of what I might lose. I am deciding because I have thought about it for 16 months, and I have looked at the honest reality of what my life is, what it has become, what it could be, and I want more of it. I want a very long time of this." She paused. "Of the archive and the teaching and the letters from the conclave, and you in the doorway of wherever I am working, and the library at 10 o'clock on Wednesday nights with snow on the windows. I want all of that, for as long as all of that can be." He was not moving. The amber eyes were very focused on her. "You understand what it involves," he said, "completely." "I have read every document in this archive pertaining to it," she said, "including the first-hand accounts. I have asked 3 independent vampire physicians for medical consultations under confidentiality. I have also," she added, "spoken to Mira, who is 16 and not yet facing this question for many decades, but who has the most practical perspective on the dual existence question of anyone I have encountered." "What did Mira say?" he asked, and something in his voice had gone very soft. "She said that you are the most honorable vampire she has ever known, and that I am the best teacher she has ever had, and that if the two of us spent anything less than several centuries making each other insufferable with footnotes and primary sources, it would be a genuine waste of an extraordinary situation." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "She is not wrong." "She rarely is," Isadora said. "She has excellent instincts. I have told her so repeatedly." He stood up from the archive table and drew her with him, and she went, and he held her in the way he always held her, with that absolute and deliberate care, and she could feel through the old stone walls the distant sounds of the court going about its evening, the half-blood children's dormitory settling into quiet, the night guards changing posts, the ancient rhythms of a place that had been running for centuries before she arrived and would run for centuries after. And she thought that she was going to be part of those centuries, and that this was not frightening, but extraordinary. "There is a process," he said quietly, against her hair. "It is formal. There are ceremonies. The conclave will want documentation." "Obviously," she said. "I will prepare the documentation personally." "Of course you will." He drew back enough to look at her face. "It will take time. The medical process is not simple. I know. I have the documentation, and after, she said, "I will still want to be in the archive on Saturday mornings, and I will still want to teach the half-bloods, and I will still want you in the doorway." "I will be in the doorway," he said, "and I will still be extraordinarily difficult about imprecise historical citations." "I would be deeply concerned if that changed," he said. She smiled. He looked at her smile with the particular quality of attention that she had first catalogued on the day he brought incorrect documents to the classroom, and had been cataloguing ever since, the attention of someone who finds a specific person genuinely extraordinary and has stopped pretending that is not exactly what is happening. "Isadora," he said. "Yes, I love you." He said it with the precision he brought to everything that mattered, simple and direct and entirely certain, and she felt it in all the places she had felt things about him since the 4th week of her employment, warm and specific and absolutely real. "I have loved you since before the library conversations, and since before the claiming, and since considerably before I was willing to call it that accurately, and I intend to continue loving you for a very long time, with your permission. She put her hand against his face, his cool marble skin and his amber eyes, and 600 years of choosing honesty over convenience. And she thought about Elara Voss's letter from 1612, matter-of-fact and warm, and more at home in an unexpected life than in anything previously known. You have my permission, she said. You have had it since approximately the 4th week. He laughed. She had heard him laugh before, but not like this, not with this particular quality of completely unguarded warmth, and it was the most extraordinary sound she had ever heard in this ancient court, and she thought that this was the real thing she had found in the Court of Ashenveil. Not the archive, and not the curriculum, and not even the formal institutional standing of the chief archivist. It was this, the specific, irreplaceable reality of this man in this moment, choosing to be known. She kissed him in the archive with Elara Voss's letter on the table beside them, and outside the high windows the spring evening was going gold and warm, and in the dormitory wing of the court, Mira was probably organizing something with tremendous 12-year-old efficiency, and the conclave's correspondence was neatly filed, and the old codes were on record, and the dangerous devotion that everyone in this court had doubted was exactly as real as it had always been, exactly as documented as she could make it, and entirely, irrevocably theirs. The formal process took 8 months. The conclave documentation required 47 pages of supporting material, which Isadora produced with a level of archival precision that caused one of the conclave's senior reviewers to write an unprompted note, saying that the submission was the most thorough voluntary life transition filing they had processed in a century. She accepted this compliment with satisfaction. The medical procedure itself was overseen by the court physician, a quiet and thorough vampire named Thessaly, who had been practicing for 300 years, and who treated Isadora with the careful professional respect of someone who understood they were doing something that mattered very much to very specific people. It was not a simple thing, and it was not without discomfort, and Silas stayed within reach for every stage of it, which she had told him was unnecessary, and which he had continued to do anyway. With the calm implacability of someone who has decided that his proximity is not negotiable. She did not mind. She came through it the way she came through everything, paying attention and refusing to be managed by it. And on the other side of it, the world was different in small, extraordinary ways, sharper and quieter and more layered. And Silas was there when she opened her eyes, sitting in the chair beside her with one of the archive documents in his hand, and the patient stillness of someone who was not watching the clock because he had stopped worrying about the clock. "Well," she said. Well, he agreed. "The archive will need to be reorganized," she said. "I want to add a proper cross-reference system to the pre-1600 materials." He looked at her. "You have been awake for 30 seconds. I have been thinking about it for 8 months," she said. "I have plans." "Of course you do," he said, and the smile was there, the real one, and she thought that she was going to have a very long time to keep cataloguing it, which was the most satisfying archival project she had ever undertaken. The court settled the political landscape which had been unsettled by the claiming and by Aldrich's censure and by the conclave's formal recognition, found a new equilibrium, one in which the chief archivist of Ashenveil was a formal and undeniable institution, in which the half-blood students had a teacher who would go to war for them in any available forum, in which the lord of the court had, for the first time in anyone's recent memory, a partner who consistently knew exactly what he was thinking and told him so directly. The other courts adjusted, some grudgingly, some, to Isadora's genuine pleasure, with a curiosity that turned into genuine engagement, 2 other courts requesting educational consultations about their own half-blood populations, which she provided in writing with full citation of sources. Mira turned 17 and began talking about wanting to study law, specifically vampire governance law, with a focus on the historical blood law record. Isadora wrote her a letter of recommendation that took 3 days to perfect, and which Mira kept. Aldrich Voss stayed in the Western courts. The conclave's formal record of his conduct at Ashenveil was a persuasive deterrent to further interference, as was the increasingly robust documentation of the claiming's legal standing. He was not reconciled, and she did not expect him to be. But he was contained, which was sufficient. In the early summer of the year following her transition, Isadora sat in the library at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night, which was precisely where she always sat at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night. Working on the cross-reference system she had been planning since she woke up after the procedure and thinking about what a remarkable sequence of choices had led her from a public school classroom with chalk dust on her blazers to this. Silas sat across from her, which was precisely where he always sat, and he was reviewing a conclave briefing with the focused attention he brought to governance matters. And the library was warm and quiet around them, and the city outside the court was going about its late-night business. And somewhere in the dormitory wing, Mira was probably reading something she had taken from the archive without formally requesting access, which was technically a protocol violation that Isadora had decided not to formally document. "You are smiling," Silas said, without looking up from the briefing. "I smile frequently," she said. "You are smiling at nothing in particular." "I am smiling at something very particular," she said. "I am smiling at this." He looked up. She gestured a small and encompassing gesture that took in the library and the books and the window with the city lights beyond it and him across the table. "At all of this. At the fact that I got on a bus 8 months after you sent me a letter about an educational position and walked into a vampire court and was immediately told by the lord of the court that I had the Treaty of Varenthus in the wrong century." He looked at her. "You did have it in the wrong century." "I know. You were right. I am still pleased you told me about it." She folded her hands on the table. "I am pleased about all of it. The conclave documentation, and the archive, and the half-blood curriculum, and the ancient vow of claiming, and all 300 vampires being outraged that I knew the legal language correctly." She paused. "I am especially pleased about the part where you told me you had been reading my thank you note 14 times. "I regret disclosing that," he said with great dignity. "You absolutely do not," she said. He looked at her across the table with those amber eyes, and the smile was present, steady and warm and entirely real, and she held it the way she held everything she loved, with careful and specific attention. "No," he said, "I do not." Outside the library windows, the city lights were doing the thing they did in summer, warm and gold against the dark sky, and the court was settling into its nighttime rhythms. And somewhere in the sealed archive the documents were waiting to be cross-referenced, and somewhere in the old codex the ancient vow of claiming was exactly where it had always been, patient and permanent, waiting for someone stubborn enough and specific enough to find it. Isadora Kingsley had found it. She had found quite a lot of things, in the end. She had found the vow and the archive and the curriculum and the children and the library at 10 o'clock on Wednesday nights, and a vampire lord who read thank you notes 14 times and could not stop coming to the library doorway, who had 6 centuries of choosing honesty over convenience, and had looked at her and chosen her with the same absolute and permanent certainty. Everyone had doubted the human teacher. They had looked at the chalk dust on her blazer, and the determination in her dark eyes, and the 17 pages of legal clauses in her bag, and they had seen nothing that concerned them. They had been wrong about everything. She looked at Silas across the table, at the archive document in his hands, and the particular quality of his attention as he looked back at her, and she thought that being wrong about her was possibly the most expensive mistake the Court of Ashenveil had ever made, and that she intended for a very long time to keep proving it. "Shall I make tea?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Please." She rose from the table in the library that was hers as much as any room she had ever known, and outside the window the city went on being the city, human and vampire, and half-blood and ancient and alive, and behind her she heard the faint, precise sound of Silas turning a page, and she was, in a very specific and thoroughly documented way, entirely at home.